I want to welcome you to the 2022 Willard Lecture. We are doing this obviously virtually tonight, which is old hat by now for most of us. But I know that we have about 200 different screens connecting to this webinar. We originally were going to have about 400 people in the fellowship hall at First Presbyterian Church uptown. And so I think that group or a similar size is gathered this afternoon. So welcome. My name is Penn Peary. I'm the senior pastor at First Pres, where I've been in my 10th year, and I've had the good fortune of giving the Willard introduction for 9 of those years. We've got people on the line tonight who are members of First Pres, other friends of the church from Charlotte, people from throughout the state and country, and I'm glad that you are here. I want to give a little bit of some logistics at first, and then I'm going to introduce Father Gregory Boyle to you, and then we will get started. So tonight is Father Boyle is going to speak for about 30 minutes, just kind of whatever he wants to say, he'll say. And then we will have question and answer for the balance of the evening. We will not go beyond 90 minutes total, but we'll see where the energy is and how the conversation goes after Father Boyle speaks. There is a Q&A feature to this webinar, and I'm going to trust you to poke around and find it. But as you have questions that come up, please pose those questions through that Q&A. We've got a couple of folks who are working back screen that are going to go through the questions and feed them to me, and then I will pose those to Father Boyle, and we'll have some conversation that way. So even if, while Father Greg is speaking, if you got a question that pops up, go ahead and put it in the Q&A feature, and we'll have our folks back screen who will go through that and get it to me at the right time after Father Greg has spoken. I want to say a couple of thank yous before I do introductions. There is a Willard committee, and I want to say a great word of thanks to them. They've been hard at work as we prepared for tonight. I want to say a very special word of thanks to one of my colleagues on staff at First Pres, Gerald Kiesler, who is the primary staff person in support for the Willard. Gerald has worked extremely hard. Originally, Father Greg was scheduled to come speak with us March 15th, 2020. We held out hope that week, but of course it did not happen. Gerald worked hard to prepare for that. And again, this time was working very hard with her team to prepare for tonight. We, of course, had to pivot, which is old hat by now. But I do want to say a special word of thanks to Gerald, who has really been tireless in her support of this ministry, which is an important part of our congregation. Let me say a word about the Willard. In 1968, 20-year-old Charles R. Willard Jr. left his home and family in Charlotte to enlist in the Army. Never shy of adventure, Charles joined the Army Rangers, and in 1970 found himself on a reconnaissance behind enemy lines in Vietnam. His missions provided valuable information to the American effort, but eventually it cost him his life. Back at First Presbyterian, his grief-stricken parents, Charlie and Lydia Willard, were eager to keep his memory alive, and they established an endowment to fund the Charles R. Willard Lecture Series. For 44 years, this lecture series has created opportunities for First Presbyterian to deepen and enrich the spiritual lives of its members and extended community by bringing gifted teachers and thought leaders to our church. Each Willard lecture, in his or her own way, has engaged our faith tradition with relevant issues, including justice, human dignity, and inclusion. Tonight, of course, our Willard lecturer is Father Gregory Boyle. Father Boyle is a Jesuit priest and the founder of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, California. Homeboy is the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and reentry program in the world. Homeboy employs and trains former gang members in a range of social enterprises and provides critical services to thousands of men and women who walk through the doors every year seeking a better life. Father Boyle is the author of best-selling books, Tattoos on the Heart, Barking to the Choir, and most recently, The Whole Language, The Power of Extravagant Tenderness, which was released last fall. Father Boyle has received countless honors, including being named a Champion of Change by the White House in 2014. Notable as these are, what stands out most about Father Boyle is his lifelong dedication to seeing the whole person and to nurturing them into recognizing their own goodness. He sits with, walks with, and bears with others' deepest pain and loves them into awareness of God's unwavering love. It is hard to find a person who is more attuned and responsive to Christ's teachings than our Willard lecturer this evening. And so with that, I will officially welcome you, Father Boyle. We're grateful for the time you have will be able to spend with us tonight. And I will turn it over to you and remind those who are watching to please pose your questions on the Q&A, and we'll engage after Father Greg has spoken. Thank you.
Thank you, Penn, and thank all of you for your flexibility. It's interesting. The homies are very protective of me, and my doctor, my hematologist, because I have leukemia. I don't know. They were just Omicron kind of freaked everybody out. So thank you for accommodating this. It's a privilege to be with you. I was going to bring two homies with me, but everybody, we actually closed our office down on Friday. So it's, and we hope to be open tomorrow, but this has really hit folks quite in a way that we hadn't seen even earlier. So there you have it. We all kind of have the same vision of wanting the world to look differently than it currently looks. And so we're all wanting to align our hearts with the heart of the God who loves us without measure and without regret. So we want to imagine something different, and so to that end, we want to imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. We want to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. It's the thing that joins us together. I was just reading a poem earlier by a guy named William Stafford, and it said, "Your job is to find out what the world is trying to be." So we're trying to align ourselves with that same kind of mystical vision. What is our world wanting to be? And how does God see it? So we all decide to do something very specific. We try to stand at the margins because we have an inkling that that's how the margins will get erased in the first place. So we stand with a particularity. We choose in our way, all of us, because we want to embrace the marrow of the gospel. We stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, and we stand with those whose dignity has been denied and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. Every once in a while, we all have this exquisite experience to stand with the despised, the easily despised, and the readily left out. We get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And we stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And our goal is kinship. And I suspect if that happened to always be our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice. We would be, in fact, celebrating it. And because we've all been around the block a few times, we brace ourselves because people will inevitably accuse us of wasting our time at the margins. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." And so you go to the margins and other voices get heard, which is, of course, what we want. Of course, none of that makes any sense unless we have a sense of God that's spacious and expansive and larger. I'm a Jesuit, so St. Ignatius used to always talk about the God who's always greater. And he would say, take care to keep always before your eyes first God. There's nothing more consequential than our actual notion of who God is. It changes everything. I remember I was standing in front of 500 gang members mainly gang members at a San Fernando juvenile hall. We were in a gym and I was presiding and I was wearing my alb and my multicolored stole. And I was sitting there and, and they had these sheets that, you had English on one side and Spanish on the other side. And so I was listening to the readings and the homies would get up one by one and they would, do the reading. So the first guy got up and did the first reading. Well, the second guy got up to do the responsorial psalm. And I was just noticing as I had my eyes closed listening that he had sort of an overabundance of confidence. And he got up and in a very loud voice, he said, "The Lord is exhausted." And I say, "What the hell?" And I looked at my sheets and it was, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's way better. If you think about it, the exalted God is kind of the God of our own creation. That's creating God in our own image. Everyone knows that. I mean, if I was God, I would want to be exalted. But the exhausted God is actually a richer image. It's more spacious, it's more expansive. You all know what it's like with your kids and your grandkids. Someone will say on Monday morning, "How was your weekend?" I said, "Oh my God, I had the grandkids were over. I'm exhausted." But, it's a good tired. It's an exhaustion that asks you to be outside of yourself, which of course is where the joy is. Meister Eckhart, a mystic and theologian who lived many years ago, used to say, "It is a lie, any talk of God that doesn't comfort you." Now, we kind of don't believe that, but I think it's true that once you kind of know what kind of God we have, it alters everything. My friend Mirabai Starr, who's a mystic and writes about mystics, she says, once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods, which is kind of an essential task of maturation. As you grow and evolve, the God becomes larger. I remember I had a spiritual director once who said, "We need a better God than the one we have." He was a Jesuit. But I know exactly what he means. I mean, we've settled for a partial God instead of holding out for the God we actually have. The God who is too busy loving us to have any time left for anything else. This will always reflect how you are in the world as you seek to create a community of kinship such that God might recognize it. It's absolutely consequential. if your God is partial and puny, well, then you have no choice. You're going to be that in the world. And our invitation is always to be in the world who God is: compassionate, loving, and kind. So Homeboy Industries was started a long time ago, in 1988, during the time I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects. It was the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. And we had 8 gangs at war with each other. And that led the LAPD to name my parish as the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in all of Los Angeles. I buried my first young person killed because of the sadness in 1988. And I buried my 254th on Friday. He was 14 years old. His name was Jeremy. So we did a lot of things in those early days. We started a school because there were so many junior high, middle school age gang members who had been kicked out of their home school. Nobody wanted them. So they were wreaking havoc in the middle of the day. They were, hanging out in the projects, writing on walls, selling drugs. They were violent. So finally, I walked out to them and I would kind of isolate them one at a time. And I'd say, hey, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, every single one said, yeah, I would. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them. So that kind of forced my hand. So right across the street from the church is our elementary school, our parochial school, grades K to 8, which occupied the first 2 floors of the building. But the 3rd floor was the convent. And so one evening I gathered all the nuns in the living room and I sat them down and I said, hey, would you guys mind, moving out? And we could turn the convent into a school for gang members. And they looked at each other and they said, sure. And that was the sum total extent of their discernment process. And so we were off to the races. And then gang members came from all of the 8 gangs, which was really quite a tense place. We had teachers and even a principal who only lasted one day once. But it created something of a disconnect in the parish. The parishioners would sidle up to me and they'd say, hey, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in and bad people out. And I thought, well, that was a good gospel challenge. And then in short order, the gang members would say, if only we had jobs. So myself and the women in the parish, and projects were mainly women with children, 25% African American and 75% Latino. And so myself and the women, we marched around the housing projects and the factories that surrounded them, trying to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. So we just started things. We started a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of rival enemy gang members from the different 8 gangs. And then in 1992, after the unrest that followed a verdict of the Rodney King beating, the whole city of Los Angeles, every pocket of poverty ignited except the poorest pocket. And so the LA Times wanted to know why my parish community hadn't ignited. And so I said, well, I think it's because we had 60 strategically hired gang members who all had a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gangbang and a reason not to torch their own community. So the article appeared the next day, and a movie producer named Ray Stark, who happened to have $500 million, happened to read it in the paper, and I was summoned to his Beverly Hills office. And he said to me, how should I spend my money? And as I look back on it now, I see that I woefully undershot my request, but I was young, I had hair. And so I said, well, there's an abandoned bakery across the street from our elementary school. You could buy it. It has ovens. They don't work, but you could fix them. We could put hair nets on rival enemy gang members and they could bake bread. And I suppose we could call the place Homeboy Bakery. And that was the sum total of my entire business plan. And he said, sure. And a month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, Homeboy Bakery and Homeboy Tortillas, we changed our name from Jobs for a Future was what we called ourselves, to Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this. And not everything worked. I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And now, as was mentioned kindly by Penn at the beginning, we backed our way now into becoming the largest gang intervention, rehab, reentry program on the planet. So about 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors trying to imagine something different. And we greet them. And the centerpiece is our 18-month training program. Every single gang member who walks through our doors comes barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. And so you have to kind of choose to be in the world who God is. And you want every breath you take to cherish in the same way that God cherishes us. Every single gang member walks through our doors, thousands of them. There are 120,000 in all of Los Angeles County. Every single one walks through with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was either frightened or frightening. And you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. And so if it's true that the traumatized are going to be more likely to cause trauma, it's equally true that a cherished person will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. And so homies often say at Homeboy Industries that, we're used to being watched. We're not used to being seen. And you go to the margins to see people. I was in Houston once. I was giving a talk, and a young guy, a former gang member covered in tattoos, who had been to prison, but at that moment he was working with gang members in the streets of Houston as a hardcore gang intervention worker. And he came up to me, and a very earnest guy, and he said, "How do you reach them?" And I found myself saying, well, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? Can you receive who they are? Can you allow your heart to be altered by the people you encounter? You don't go to the margins to make a difference. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. which all connects back to the original covenant, where our exhausted God says, as I have loved you, so must you have a special preferential care and love for the widow, orphan, and stranger. And so God identifies these kind of subgroupings of the poor because God thinks these are the folks who know what it's like to have been cut off. And because they have suffered greatly and in exactly this way, God thinks these are precisely the people who will be our trusted and trustworthy guides to lead the rest of us to the kinship of God. It's how we get to kinship. Service is a good place to start, but service is the hallway that gets you to the ballroom, and the ballroom is the place of kinship and connection, where you obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them. How do we bridge the distance that exists between us? And so we want to see as God sees, and we want to, have a different lens, a mystical lens that helps us truly see each other, not just watch. The Christmas carol says, long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. And yeah, it's about Jesus, and yeah, it's about Christmas, but how is it not the job description of all 224 of you on this screen? You appear and the soul feels its worth. But you appear as a light that people can see by. It's not about yakking about Jesus. It's about being in the world who God is, which is what Jesus did. Jesus only took 4 things seriously. They're big things, but they're only 4. Inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. And that's what we do. At Homeboy, we're trying to be kind of that, we're like the front porch of the house everyone wants to live in. We want to greet people. And as the Buddhists say, oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. At Homeboy, we're allergic to the notion of holding the bar up and asking gang members to measure up. Mainly because our exhausted God never does that, ever. Instead, we hold the mirror up and we tell people the truth, because we all share the same truth. We're all unshakably good. And once people know that truth, they become that truth. Once they know that they are exactly what God had in mind when God made them, then they become that truth more and more. And no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. And my fervent prayer was that Jeremy, before he left us and was laid to his rest on Friday, had a sense of his truth, and that he tasted something of his true self in loving. But we always have to reach in and dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. The great scripture scholar Marcus Borg says that the principal suffering of the poor throughout history and throughout scripture is shame and disgrace, and I think that's quite right. In the Acts of the Apostles, you have this notion that's quite kind of odd, a sentence that leaps out. And it says only, and awe came upon everyone. And it seems to suggest that the measure of health in any community at all, including your own, may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So years and years ago, I remember I took two homies with me. Well, before that, I was invited to speak at, an in-service, I guess it was. It was what they call a gang in-service in Richmond, Virginia. And I'd done many of these before. And, and it's a 9 to 5 social workers commandeer, a hotel ballroom, and they get credits and they sign in, and you have workshops and breakout sessions and keynotes. And I'd given many keynotes at these kinds of things. So I bought my ticket. I said yes. But before I was to fly, I pull out the original letter that invited me, and to my horror, I saw that I was to be the only speaker. 9 to 5, all damn day. And I said to myself what the homies often say, oh, hell no, I'm not going to be the only speaker. So then I brought two homies in. So they're all trainees for 18 months, and they do a variety of things. So I bring in Jose and Andre, African-American homie, and Jose Latino. And actually they were both enemies from rival gangs. So I sit them down in my office. I said, look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia, and I'd like you to get up and tell your stories to 600 social workers. Take your time, because we got a long ass day to fill. Well, I had never heard their stories, and Jose gets up first, and I guess at the time he was like 25 years old, and he had been to prison, tattooed, a gang member. At that juncture, he had become a very valued member of our substance abuse team. He was a man solid in his own recovery, and now he was helping homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. And so not only had he been in prison, he also had a long stretch as a heroin addict and an even longer stretch as a homeless man. So he gets up in front of 600 social workers, and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp, and he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. And we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. And then he continued. He said, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage, and she knocks on the door, and the guy comes to the door, and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, "I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds?" And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well despise the wounded. Years ago, I would ride my bike in the housing projects, and I would patrol the 8 different gangs, and it was, when I look back on it, it was odd. I mean, it was put that Uzi down. Are you sure you want to shoot that guy? That kind of thing. I was in Aliso Village housing projects, and I was, talking to these 8 gang members in a darkened archway, and I was straddling my big old black beach cruiser, and I could see in the distance in the parking, barely lit parking lot, there was this kid we all called Bandit, and he was selling crack cocaine, which they did in those days. They'd run up to a car, and so then he was coming back to where he didn't know I had arrived, and he was counting his money. I wish I could say that, he was embarrassed to kind of walk and see me there, but he not so much. He never stepped foot into Homeboy Industries until the day he did. In recovery, drugs and alcohol, the same would be true of gang recovery. They say it takes what it takes. It can be the birth of a son, the death of a friend, a long stretch in prison. It takes what it takes. I don't know what it took for Bandit to walk through the doors, but I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw him. And he said what gang members often say: "I'm tired of being tired." And so he began his 18 months with us, and he came to terms with what was done to him and what he had done. And he transformed his pain so he didn't have to transmit it anymore. And he did therapy at our place, and he removed his tattoos, and he took all sorts of classes like anger management and parenting, and he advanced. He got his high school diploma at our place. And then it came time to move on, and now he was resilient. And the world was going to throw at him what it will, but this time he wasn't going to be toppled by it. And so we want to make the transition seamless. So we have employment services people at our place, job developers who find the next job. And we have also 10 social enterprises, bakeries and restaurants and electronic recycling. But we moved him on to a warehouse job beyond Homeboy. After like 5 years, he ran the place. And then, another 3 years later, he was elevated and promoted even further. He married his childhood sweetheart. He bought a house. He had 3 daughters. I hadn't heard from him in a long time, and no news is good news. But he called me on the phone on a Friday afternoon with a little bit of panic in his voice. And he said, "Gee, you got to bless my daughter." I said, "My gosh, what happened? Is she sick? Is she in the hospital?" And he said, "Oh, no, no. On Sunday, she's going to Humboldt College." Imagine my Jessica. But she's a little tiny chaparrita, and she's only 18 years old, and Humboldt's far. Do you think you could give her a blessing before she goes? And I said, "Sure." I said, "Look, tomorrow's Saturday. I have baptisms at 1. Why don't you come by at 12:30? We'll do a little send off." And Bandit and his wife and the 3 girls show up right on time. And so I asked little Jessica to stand in front of the altar, and I tell them, everybody surround her with your bodies and your love, and everybody touch her and put your hands on her head and on her shoulder. And I tell them to bow their heads and close their eyes. And as the homies say, I do a long ass prayer. You know, I go on and on. And somewhere in the middle of this prayer, I notice that we've all become chillones. We're all crying. I don't know why we're crying, except for the fact that Bandit and his wife don't know anybody who's ever gone to college except me. Certainly nobody in their families. And so, you know, we kind of wipe our eyes and we laugh at how mushy we got. And to change the subject, I look at Jessica, I say, "Hey, what are you going to study at Humboldt College?" And she was very quick, "Forensic psychology." I go, "Damn, forensic psychology." And Bandit over here chimes in, "Yeah, she wants to study the criminal mind." And Jessica turns and looks at her father, and she does one of these, you know, and Bandit sees her and he laughs. He goes, "Yeah, I'm going to be her first subject." So we go out to the parking lot and we give big hugs, and they pile into the car. But Bandit hangs back, and I'm glad he has. And I said, "Hey, can I tell you something? I give you credit for the man you've chosen to become, for choosing to walk in your own footsteps. I'm proud of you." And his eyes fill up with tears, and so do mine, and we stare at each other for what felt like an eternity. And finally he said, "You know, I'm proud of myself. All my life, people called me a lowlife, a bueno para nada, a good for nothing. I guess I showed them." I said, "Yeah, I guess you did." And the soul feels its worth. Exactly right. Oh, nobly born. Remember who you really are. None of us go to the margins to make a difference, because then it's about me if I do it that way. But if you go to the margins so that the folks there make you different, then it's about us. And it has to be about us. How can we move from watching to actually seeing people? Till you appear and the soul feels its worth. And so you go to the margins because that's the only way they'll ever get erased. And that's how the only way we'll ever celebrate our union and our connection in the very kinship of God, where everything is exquisitely mutual, where we take seriously what Jesus took seriously, and we allow the widow, orphan, and stranger to be our trustworthy guides. And that's how we choose to be in the world, who our exhausted God happens to actually be, who loves us without measure, and without regret. And pretty soon, we cease to care if anybody accuses us of wasting our time at the margins. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time to whatever's on your mind.
Amen. I just sitting with the word of scripture washing over as I reflected on the people you have incarnated for us, Father Greg. Thank you for that. There are some questions that I've seen come through, and I'm getting some from the back room here. Let me pose one to you, Father Greg. And I confess there is a little, as I've in my ministry, well, I'll ask the question. How do you, in your ministry, in your walk, how do you witness pain and walk with people experiencing it without becoming overwhelmed and consumed by it yourself? I mean, from 1988, you've been on this journey with Homeboy Industries, and how do you navigate without being overwhelmed?
Yeah, I sometimes I suppose it's kind of the burnout question, and I kind of learned long ago that if you stay anchored in the present moment, and if it's not about you, you'll never burn out. So then it's about delighting in the person in front of you. And, my books are just filled, I guess, with stories like that, where it's mainly about laughing. And even in times that are really quite difficult and pain that's excruciating. But that's where the joy is. I mean, Jesus says, in my joy, yours, your joy complete. We always think that following Jesus is some kind of grim duty, but it's the opposite. The rich young man walked away and he was sad. I mean, it has nothing to do with bank accounts. It has to do with we're being invited to where the joy is. So, what keeps things eternally replenishing? And occasionally I'll get my senior staff who will say, I just think I'm too compassionate, and maybe I need some time off. And I go, no, you've allowed it to become about you. It can't be about you. If it's about you, you will burn out. I guarantee you will burn out. But if it's about the other person, then you're endlessly curious. You're always delighting. You're always having your heart altered. All that stuff that's what eternally replenishing looks like. So, so I've been working with gang members for 40 years, but probably in year 10 somewhere, and it's a long story, longish story, but I'll cut to the chase. A homie whose brother had killed himself, which never happens. He was devastated by it, and I went to pick him up at a drug rehab and to attend the funeral. And he had a dream the night before, and he said, in the dream, you and I were in a very darkened room, and absolutely pitch black, no illuminated exit signs, no light creeping under the door. but I knew you were there, even though we weren't speaking. And somewhere in the darkness and in the silence, I reached into my pocket and I happened to have a flashlight, and I aimed the flashlight steadily on the light switch in the room. And so the kid, we called him Lulu. Lulu said, I know that I'm the only one who can walk to the light switch. I'm really glad that you happen to have a flashlight. And so with great trepidation, he walks and follows this beam of light. And I, in the dream, I am holding the steady light, and I don't waver. He gets to the light switch and he sighs a huge sigh. And now he's sobbing in the telling of this dream. And he flips the light switch on, and the room is flooded with light, and he can barely speak. But he says, the light is better than the darkness. Like he did not know that to be the case. I've never had an experience like this before or since. Absolutely changed my life in an instant. Whereas those first 10 years of doing this work, I was always perilously close to burnout because I had allowed it to become about me. And then in the telling of this dream, I just stopped. I saw it. It can't be about me. You have to go to the margins not to make a difference. You have to go there to be made different. And then it becomes about us. Then it's about kinship. Then it's about everybody is growing and everybody is finding more room in their hearts for others. And then you find the joy, you find your true self in loving. And then we can all just walk each other home. And it just doesn't matter, really. I mean, shit's gonna happen. Stuff is going to happen, tragedy, death. None of us are gonna live forever, but all of us can live in the forever. And that's how you do it. So none of it is grim duty. All of it is joy, complete. You know, always. I mean, because it's really about lenses. It's not about what happens. It's only about how you see things as they happen. I hope that makes sense.
One of the people in my tradition, John Calvin, talks about scripture as the spectacles through which we see the world. Here's a related question. How do we, I'm just going to read it verbatim. How do we transcend the and the othering with those that do not think like us? How do we transcend the griping and the othering with those that do not think like us?
Yeah, I think I don't think we name things correctly, you know, and it gets us in trouble. And so like, who do we think we're seeing, you know? Like okay, so we have mandatory vaccines for everybody who works at Homeboy, and we're a kind of an essential organization deemed so by the mayor. And our volume is so high, and people are released from prison. So we shut down on Friday just because it was a little bit like how you cancel flights. There weren't enough pilots or flight attendants to run the place, so we had to cancel. And so, but you know, we're going to be open tomorrow. But how do we diagnose things? You know, what's our analysis? So, and I hope this isn't too controversial, but I mean, it's like, you know, so our doctors refuse to do tattoo removal. You cannot enter our clinic, which is in our headquarters, unless you can show proof that you're vaccinated, because it's too close quarters. And a lot of them are older doctors who are retired and who are vulnerable. So a homie, wanted to get vaccinated. I mean, I'm sorry, he wanted to get his tattoos removed. And I said, "Are you vaccinated?" And he said, "No." So I said, "Why aren't you vaccinated?" And he says, "I don't know what's in it." And so we were texting. And so I was at an In-N-Out burger, which is famous in Los Angeles and like the best burgers in town. So I sent him a picture of the In-N-Out burger. And I said, "I don't know what's in this, but it tastes delicious." And I'm trusting that, people aren't going to poison my burger. I just trust. Now, who trusts? Healthy people do. In fact, it may well be how we measure health, if you trust. Now, obviously, this guy he's not savvy, he's wounded. He's not onto something, he's injured. And we name these things incorrectly. But our starting point, I think, has to be the same as the God of love, which is to say, everybody's unshakably good, no exceptions. We belong to each other, no exceptions. And how do we love each other into wholeness? But if you think that there's such a thing as somebody who isn't good, then you're going to have difficulties doing this. If you think there are some people who don't belong to us, it's going to be hard when it comes to the other. Because, I think we have to admit as church that we've kind of backed the wrong horse on this kind of thing. So, I mean, the truth is, moralism has never kept us moral. It's only kept us from each other. And I think we have to agree that that's the opposite of God's dream come true. That kinship is God's dream come true, that you may be one. Jesus says it pretty clearly, that you may be one. That's all I want. It's not about do good and avoid evil. Once you know the joy of kinship and the God of love, and you're firing all the other gods, nobody needs to tell you the difference between right and wrong. We've settled for kind of moralism, but we should hold out for something better. The poet Wallace Stevens says, "We live in the description of the place and not the place itself." So somehow God wants us to stop settling for the description of the place and really hold out for the place itself, which is kinship and connection and oneness.
So I've flipped through the participants and see a lot of familiar names, members in my congregation, as well as a lot of other community leaders in Charlotte. We've got nonprofit leaders on the call. The sheriff of Mecklenburg County is on the call. So I've got an organizational question for you, and that is this: that you in your books, you know, one of the themes is that context and culture should precede content. And I may be putting words in your mouth, but that's the genesis of this question. And so what tips could you give to leaders in organizations to help shift from a quote, teaching the lesson approach to a being present with approach in terms of the culture of the group or the organization?
Yeah, I think, I travel pre-pandemic anyway, around the country, and they're comparable programs, and all of us do the same thing in a sense. All of us have the same menu of services. And that's our language. Our language, everybody uses the same wraparound services. And obviously that's a good thing. But the difference at Homeboy, I think the secret sauce is that it's a wraparound place, that it's about culture, and it's about the context is community. And tenderness is the methodology. Tenderness is how, love moves from being in your head to connective tissue. Otherwise, people won't connect. And that's the thing that always, I think when people walk through our doors at our headquarters, they notice it. It's kind of it's palpable. A homie said once, there's an aroma here. And it's more, so we do all the anger management and tattoo removal and therapy and classes, parenting. But how do we keep from becoming the Department of Motor Vehicles? For anger management, go to window number 48. No. Everybody holds a piece, and everybody supplies a dose. Or as the homies always say to me, everybody here, we all have the keys to the place, which is to say it's not reliant, obviously, on me or on even our senior staff. Everybody participates in it. So even our homies who are our security guards, they're given sidewalk therapy all the time. A guy the other day, put his arm around a guy and he said, "Hey, do me a favor, give me that gun," which you could see, "and I'm going to hold it for you. You go in and see Father Greg, and then I'll give it to you later." I mean, it was like he had to make a call, but everybody is participating in the power of tenderness, and kindness is the only strength there is. But if everybody's participating in it, then you've created a culture that works on people. So in the old days, if somebody left the program, got arrested again, or started to get high, we used to lament. We used to say, "Oh, well, maybe they'll come back." Nobody says that now. Everybody says with absolute confidence, they'll be back. Because once you have a taste of having been cherished, there's nothing like it. And they get softened into some kind of corner that is so foreign. And otherwise it's about, you are deficient and we need to make you not. And you need to measure up. And your character is just so bad. And you're not smart enough. And you don't know anything, so you need to be trained. We never talk that way. A homie texted me and said, "How can I become a better man?" And on the surface, you would say, "Well, isn't that great that that's what he wants?" But it broke my heart. I texted him right back and I said, "You could not be one bit better. That's your truth." And so we need to eliminate anything that disables you from seeing that. But your starting point is unshakably good. There was an article, I think, in the LA Times or New York Times this morning about a prison I had heard about in can't remember where it is. I think it's in Buenos Aires, or no, I guess it's in Brazil. But it's all this it's very Christian, and it's all Jesus and it's all kind of indoctrination. But it's all about moving from being bad to becoming good. And I don't think God agrees with that take. Sorry. God knows exactly who you are. We're all born into the world wanting the same things. we all have the same last name. You know, we're human beings. Beings is our last name. We're connected, we're whole. You know, if we can allow ourselves to be loved into wholeness and to health and no longer be strangers to ourselves. But it's never about becoming good. You already are. And now it's about seeing your unshakable goodness and then living out of that place. And everybody's true self can be found in loving. And somebody sent me a book on Rumi the other day, and it's quite good. And in it, he says, love is God's religion, which of course is true. And Jesus believed that. And loving is the only way we practice that religion. I don't know how else to do that except by loving.
It's simple and profound doctrine.
Thank you.
Another question here. In the whole language, your recent book, you say the opposite of love isn't hate but fear. Please share how you see that in our current environment and how we can respond with love.
I think again, it's sort of we don't name things correctly, you know. So, and I think Jesus would be the first to say this, but you know, he sees the guy having the seizure, and he and everybody in the crowd thinks he's possessed by a demon. And he heals him, and we move quickly to the healing. But he has epilepsy. He's not possessed by a demon. And God loved Jesus, but he named it wrong. The guy was not possessed by a demon. And that's kind of how we are, you know. So a man assaults and attacks an aged Asian woman on the streets of San Francisco. And we say hate crime, and we say Asian hate crime. But in the history of the world, a healthy person, a whole person, a person who is well, has never done that in the history of the world. But if I look at that and say it's hate, then I don't know how to break it to us. Then it's about me. And then it's self-congratulatory. But it's really about health. This is a guy, gang members have taught me this in 40 years. I've never met an evil, bad person. You know, that gang hates that gang, but nobody thinks it's about hate. It's about hurt. It's about damage. It's about wound. It's about injury. I suppose we could try to address hate. My alma mater at Gonzaga, and God love them. I love Go Zags, you know. But it was 3 years ago that a man, you know, went into the Tree of Life synagogue and killed all those people. Well, the very next week, they started a seminar, and the seminar was called Hate, because we are humans and we want to address stuff head on. But one of the reasons why we don't make progress is because the seminar should have been called Health. Nobody healthy ever in the history of the world has done such a thing as to walk into a synagogue and shoot people down. Nobody whole, nobody well. And people quibble, you know, even psychiatrists don't like to talk about that because they think now you're stigmatizing mentally ill people. I go, I don't know. I'd love to make progress. And I've had homies at our place, nobody is tripped up by bad behavior. Everybody knows that bad behavior is a language. What language is it speaking? Is it the language of meth? Is it the language of madness? Is it schizophrenia? Is it bipolar? Is it a traumatized person who's finally coming to terms with what was done to him? Is it a despondent person who can't imagine tomorrow? What language is it speaking? And this is why we don't make progress. So, not once have I ever denounced hate between gang members, because I learned early on it has nothing to do with hate. Nothing. It has to do with hurt. And so, but once we put on a new pair of lenses and once we diagnose things correctly, but we have to get over this temptation to address things head on. It's like addressing a nagging cough and say, well, here's Vicks Formula 44, and I've addressed your malady head on. But no, the cough is an indicator. It's telling you that he has lung cancer and you have to do other things. So we just settle for this kind of superficial assessment and diagnosis. And I just wish we could get deeper. I'm convinced it's one of the reasons why we don't make progress, because we love it to be about me. We want to be self-congratulatory. We want to say we're addressing stuff head on, and then we're scratching our heads because we haven't made any progress. And it's only because we haven't found the thorn underneath. We haven't diagnosed it correctly. And I hope we will, because we belong to each other, including the guy who walked down to the street and assaulted that aged Asian woman. And if we don't think that, then we don't share God's way of seeing. Because everybody knows, everybody believes in a God of second chances, even if we don't give one. And everyone believes in the mercy of God, even if we can be pretty stingy in that regard. We all know who our God is. We just do. But we settle for another version that holds us back, I think.
Last question, looking at time, and my guess is this is a question you get a lot. It is the syndication question. How Charlotte is a large city. It's not the scale of Los Angeles, but it's a city with its own problems around an inability to look at each other without seeing the other. And so the question is, what would it take to establish something like Homeboy in Charlotte? Not practically speaking, but soulfully speaking.
Yeah, so probably in 2008, when we moved into our current huge headquarters, we started to get groups coming and, stakeholders from different cities. I remember there was Wichita came, and it was, I can't remember who, city council or community activists, that kind of thing. And they begged me, they said, please airlift Homeboy into Wichita. And we had never been asked that before. So I had to ask my staff, should we become the McDonald's of gang intervention programs, with 8 billion gang members served. And so we decided not to do that. We said, people in Wichita, gang members in particular, would say, well, who are you? And what do you know about Wichita? And they'd be right. So we decided to start to give what we call technical assistance. And was many years ago. Now we've started a thing called the Global Homeboy Network. And so we have 350 programs 300 actually in the United States and 50 outside the country that are modeled on our methodology and our culture. So, there's Braveheart Industries in Glasgow, Scotland, and there's Rise Up Industries in San Diego, that kind of thing. Sydney and Guatemala City, and lots of places that are, they started their own thing, but they've kind of embraced, for lack of a better words, our way of proceeding. So we get together pre-pandemic anyway. We did it virtually the last 2 summers for 3 days in August, and people come from all over the world. And it's just the most extraordinary gathering of people. And we have, workshops and breakout sessions and big plenary sessions. But so I would encourage you, because part of the idea is, do the authentic thing, that's born from below rather than airlifted from afar. And so we like it better that way. And these programs, and sometimes it helps their fundraising, to say that they're part of the global Homeboy network, and we let them do that freely. But and so a lot of times they start with a social enterprise, and I didn't say very much about that, but we have 10 of them. So people will start with a restaurant or a bakery or a manufacturing thing, or a variety of things, and they begin with that, because it provides employment right away, and then provides training right away. And then it starts to provide a community, and you add things, services, like therapy, but it still begins with the culture and the community, a place of kinship and connection. And, so happy to help you guys, and then happy to go there when the dust settles, and it will. It will.
Surely by then.
Yeah. Well, it's been a privilege to be with all of you, and thank you again for your understanding, and really happy to get to know you even more. So
We're grateful.
Come visit.
Yeah. Well, y'all, let me say a couple of words before we sign off. I do want to thank you, Father Boyle, for your time. And prayers are with you in your cancer journey. Prayers for healing and wholeness and presence as you navigate that. This is another example of why this lecture series is so edifying. Your words are powerful and soulful in ways that other lectures have been as well in our series. And so I appreciate that. One of our intentions through this series is not to have 90 minutes a year where we think and hear profound thoughts, but where we actually continue conversations after the lecture is over. And so we are hosting, First Pres is hosting a Zoom book discussion on Father Boyle's new book, The Whole Language, on January 20th at 6 p.m. The sign up is available on the event calendar on our church's website. There will also be a Sunday class in February for discussion about today's presentation, which, by the way, has been recorded with Father Boyle's permission and will be up on the church's website under the Watch tab. I do want to invite you. This is the 2020 Willard that has been postponed to today. We invite you to the Willard event on next month on February 27th at 4 p.m. at Queen's University. The Willard is partnering. We're doing something new this year. We're partnering with a group called TheoEd, and we're bringing 4 speakers who are going to give TED-style talks. Those speakers are Otis Moss III, who is the senior pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, and he will also preach at First Pres on Sunday morning, February 27th at 11 o'clock. Yolanda Pierce is the Dean of Divinity School at Howard University. Miroslav Volf is the professor at Yale Divinity School and is founding director of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. He's very involved in international and interfaith dialogue. And then Liz Klassen-Kelly is the CEO of a local nonprofit here in Charlotte called Roof Above. So the four of them will again give TED-style talks at Queen's University on February 27th at 4 o'clock. And you can learn more and sign up at theoed.com or on the Willard page on the church's website under the Formation tab. So once again, thank you for your time tuning in tonight. Father Greg, it's great to see you. I preached in your stead this morning and quoted heavily from your new book. So even though you were not here to proclaim the word, it was proclaimed with a nod to you. So thank you for your ministry and for your time. God bless everyone. Take care.